I knocked on the guest room door like I always had, soft, because I was polite that way, and she answered with the kind of look that makes you wonder if you ever really knew someone at all. She stood there in her designer coat, hair done up the way the magazines tell you to do it, and for a second I thought she was going to hug me. Instead, she looked past me like I was part of the wallpaper and said very calmly, "Mom, the family asked you not to come tonight." I froze for a second. Nobody asks me not to come. Not my Lucy. Not after all those casseroles and late-night babysitting and the way I sewed buttons on her church dresses until my fingers were raw. I can still see the porch light on at home, the chipped mug on the kitchen table, the mason jar coins on the mantel, little things I keep because they are pieces of my life, and it felt like she had come to take all those pieces and arrange them on a shelf labeled obsolete. She closed the door gently. Not slammed it, just closed it as if that made it kinder. I stood on the hall rug, shoes quiet, and my heart felt heavy in a way that has nothing to do with age. There was a moment of silence, the kind that lets you hear the clock ticking on the mantel. And then I heard laughter drifting down from the dining room, her friends, her husband, the high, practiced chuckle of women who had never learned how to fold a fitted sheet. They were celebrating something, a promotion, a donation, perhaps a new name on the donor wall at the country club. Whatever it was, I did not belong in the picture. Her voice, low and practical, said, "You can sit over there? Mom, I put a blanket on the couch." She didn't even call me Mom, the way she used to in the kitchen when she needed a bandage or a biscuit. It came out clipped, like someone speaking into a microphone. I went to the couch. I sat with my hands wrapped around that old chipped mug she kept in the drawer for me when I visited, the one with the faded blue flowers. My hands shook a little. I think they always do when I'm surprised, even now. I remembered the mason jar, how my husband and I had filled it with pennies and dimes, how we had taught Lucy to drop a coin in when she learned to count. That jar seemed farther away than it had any right to be. I am a woman who married young, baked pies for neighbors, and learned to make do. I have pearls in a velvet box that my mother gave me, a strand my grandmother used to wear at church. I kept those pearls for dignity more than decoration. I have my own small savings, enough for groceries and a new patch of paint on the porch. My little house is paid for. The yard still smells like the tomatoes I grew every summer. But Lucy, sweet, cunning Lucy, lives in a different world now. Her house has a marble foyer, high-backed chairs, and a garden that looks like a magazine spread. She has children with college funds, vacations with crisp itineraries, and a lawyer who answers his own phone. The first time I felt something slip between us, it was a folded note on the kitchen table last spring. "We thought it best," it said in my daughter's careful handwriting, "that you not attend family finances meetings." I laughed at the handwriting. Her letters always slanted like someone trying to reach the sun. But I did not hear the joke in it. The second time was when she rearranged my name on the Christmas card list so that mine was smaller and tucked behind their new in-laws' names. Little things, I told myself, practicalities. But small knives cut, and they eventually meet a bone. I had always thought of my home as a place that kept its promises. The front door remembers the sound of your steps. The curtains remember how you tilt your head to watch the rain. My house has a locked drawer under the kitchen table where I keep letters that my mother wrote during the war, a velvet pouch with the pearls, and a small envelope with a note in my husband's handwriting dated July 14, 1998. Words about how brave we were, how proud we were of our little family. That drawer has been a friend to me. I never imagined someone would take the key and hide it. That night, when I sat in the guest room, I heard a whisper through the thin walls, one of those hurried voices, the kind that sounds like a paper being folded up and hidden. "We'll have the durable power of attorney signed next week," a man said. "We can take care of the transfer after the gala. Close the account on April 3rd. I didn't know who he was, but my name sounded like something he was clearing his throat around, like an unwanted thing on a table. I put down my mug. My hands trembled so hard I almost dropped it. I heard the words again, durable power of attorney, and the date, April 3rd, 2 days before the charity gala. The words felt like a noose. I had never heard my daughter talk about a durable power of attorney like it was dessert. In my world, that phrase belonged in a gray office with diplomas on the wall, pairs of shoes waiting by the door. It was a paper that could mean you lose the key to the locked drawer, lose the authority to pay the plumber, lose the right to choose your doctor. It could mean your voice became someone else's telephone number. I returned to the couch with the mug and imagined my pearls in a safe deposit box, their string slipping like a necklace down a stranger's throat. I imagined the mason jar hidden in a closet and the velvet pouch tucked into a file labeled Assets, Mother. My throat tightened. Outside, the city lights made little stitches on the dark fabric of the night. Inside, the chandelier made diamonds on the table and set the wine glasses glowing. They were celebrating a life that had been polite enough to forget me. I counted my breaths, the way my mother taught me, 1, 2, 3, and tried to tell myself it was only one night. But a seed was planted that night. Betrayal grows like a weed. It starts in the cracks, and before you know it, it's wrapped around the porch railing. I slept in that room with the smell of new perfume in the air and a book I could not read. I lay awake thinking of small things, how the pearls made a soft clink when I fastened them, how my husband used to whistle when he walked past the sink, the way the mason jar looked in the morning light. I thought of the date I'd been told, April 3rd, and my stomach clenched. I thought of my son, David, who lives 3 towns over and seldom calls because he's busy running his own life. I thought of neighbors who drop casseroles when someone's sick, who know how to mend a heart or a hem. The next morning, Lucy brought me breakfast on a tray, perfectly arranged, the kind of thing that looks warm and reads cold. "We hired someone to come by this morning to look at the house," she said casually, like announcing a garden service. Just routine. Her eyes flicked to the hallway where an envelope lay on the console table, stamped and sealed by a law firm I recognized from the marble lobby. My pulse did a little odd dance in my chest. "You don't need to worry about anything, Mom," she said, patting my hand in a way that felt rehearsed. "We'll handle the legal stuff. It's easier if we take care of it now." There are so many ways to say, "we'll take care of it," that mean, "we'll take everything." Some people say it with tenderness. Others say it with a ledger in their pocket. Lucy's voice was like a folded napkin, civil and cool. She set the tray down and left the room, closing the door like she was conserving something. That afternoon, a woman came to the door in a blazer. "A care manager," she said. She had a clipboard and a soft voice. She asked questions about my medications and whether I had trouble with stairs. I answered as best I could. I told her that my legs sometimes felt like they had forgotten to listen, that I used a cane when the gravel was loose. She told me in the kindest way that a durable power of attorney would allow someone to make sure I had the proper care. I did not sign anything that day. I have always been cautious about documents. My husband used to say, "Mary, if it's on paper, read it twice." Still, the woman mentioned the gala, the date, April 3rd, like a ribbon on a gift box. It all felt wrapped and tied. At some point, I noticed a small card on the table with an appointment time for estate planning, 2 days after the gala. I remembered how my husband's hands felt when he signed our mortgage back in 1979, calloused, practical. I remembered his voice in the same moment. "Things change, Mary, but we don't have to be changed by them." I held that memory close, like a blanket against a draft. My neighbor, Eleanor, stopped by one afternoon with a plate of lemon bars. She had the kind of face that had been softened by sun and sorrow in equal measure. "Something's different," she said, not bothering to hide her concern. "Lucy's been brisk. I heard them talking about a trust." Eleanor's eyes drifted to the envelope on my console table. "You should get your things in order," she said. "Just in case." I smiled, the way you smile when you don't want to make a scene at a funeral. "Thank you," I said. "I'll check on things." I checked the locked drawer. My stomach dropped when I found it empty. The velvet pouch was gone. The letters were gone. The little envelope with the July 14th, 1998 note was gone. The key was missing from the hook where I always hung it. I never expected what I found in that drawer. I sat on the floor, my back against the kitchen cabinet, and let my head fall forward. For a terrible, honest second, I thought of calling someone, my son, a lawyer, the police. But what would I say? My daughter removed my things and now my kitchen drawer is tidy? The absurdity of it made me laugh, a small, brittle sound that did not reach my eyes. Instead, I found the stamped envelope by my coffee table, the one with the law firm's name. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter addressed to me, dated March 30th. It said in clear, official terms that a meeting had been scheduled to discuss a durable power of attorney and that I was invited to attend. It also included a blank form and a note that read, "If you are unable to attend, please sign and return the enclosed power of attorney form." I read that sentence over and over until the paper blurred. The room seemed to tilt, like the porch swing when a heavy rainstorm rolls in. To be asked to sign something when your jewelry has already disappeared feels like a trick you learn to spot in a carnival. Maybe that's the thing about people. They learn new ways to be cunning when they have wallets stacked in their pockets. I thought of the mason jar, tucked in the attic under old quilts. I thought of my husband's handwriting and how the ink bled on cheap paper. I thought of the pearls, now not on my neck but somewhere in a person's safe. My hands were empty in the sense that matters. I decided then I would not, under any circumstance, sign anything without knowing what it meant. I am a simple woman, but I am not foolish. My silence for now was my armor. Still, I needed proof to hold on to something larger than grief, something like a name on a deed or a copy of a will. I called my son David, whose voice was surprised and quick. "Mom?" he said like he hadn't expected me to call. "Lucy called me last week. She said—" And then he stopped, because phone calls have a way of producing polite fiction. He said he would come by on Sunday. That gave me time. Time to breathe, time to think, time to remember things my husband used to say. "When a door is closed, Mary, look for the windows." The next day, I woke to the clink of silverware downstairs and the sound of a heavy boot on the front steps. A box was at my door labeled "Professional Services." Inside were forms, pamphlets, brochures on elder care, but also a small photograph, a printed picture of my own house, taken from the street. In the picture, the mailbox had a yard sign in front of it, "For sale," listed under Lucy's real estate agency. The file had a sticky note, "Listing effective April 5th. My knees went weak. April 5th. 2 days after April 3rd, I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the pearls empty velvet box on my lap, the same box my grandmother's hands had once opened to stitch the string back together. I held the empty box like a rosary and said a prayer, not for myself, but for a world where daughters remember how to fold their mother's hands in their own. I thought of the mason jar, still under the quilts in the attic, and of how we'd once put coins in it to buy a Christmas tree. Those coins felt like a map back to myself. When David arrived on Sunday, the first thing he did was look at my face and then at the marble floors of Lucy's foyer and measure things with his eyes. Like a carpenter checking a measuring tape. "Mom," he said. And then there was a pause, because words sometimes take a breath before they arrange themselves. "You didn't sign anything, did you?" "No," I said. He looked relieved and worried all at once. "We'll go to the lawyer. We'll get copies of everything. If she's doing anything wrong, we'll stop it." We drove to a small office with a sign that read, "Davis and Cohen, Estate Law," and a receptionist who leaned forward like she had been waiting for a story to begin. The lawyer who met with us was a woman named Clara, sharp, efficient, and honest enough to make pastors blush. She asked for names and dates and then for documents. I pulled open the empty drawer in my purse like a magician showing empty hands and told her the truth. The papers were missing. The pearls were missing, and a meeting was scheduled for April 1st, just days away. Clara sat back, and the lines on her face softened when she spoke plainly. "A durable power of attorney allows someone to make financial and health decisions on your behalf," she said. "If someone forges that document or obtains it through fraud, it can be challenged. We can request a copy of the document from Lucy's attorney and file for an injunction if necessary. But you have to act quickly. These things move fast." She wrote down the dates and the address. She mentioned an amount, about $230,000, in a retirement account that could be at stake if transfers are made without your knowledge. My heart lurched at that number. $230,000. I'd once wished for such a nest egg in a dream where the sun stayed gentle and the tomatoes never failed. That sum felt both vast and absurd, the way a field looks huge until you have to cross it yourself. We set an appointment for Clara to call Lucy's lawyer and request the documents. She faxed, an official-looking letter to the number listed. The office smelled like paper and coffee and the quiet confidence of professionals. I felt, for the first time in days, that someone else was holding a flashlight while I looked for windows. That night, I sat on my porch with my empty mug, and the stars were sharp and honest. I told myself small truths. I had raised a daughter who once learned to tie knots and mend socks. I had pearls and a mason jar and a husband's handwriting to remember. I had faith, stubborn as a weed, and an old neighbor who left lemon bars and an ex-husband's laugh in my memory. I decided I would not sign anything on April 3rd. I would be at that lawyer's office, and I would not let the lines of my life be rewritten without my signature. But there are hands that move faster than we expect, and shadows that close doors before we knock. I heard them say my name and the date again, as if saying it enough could make the will of a house change its mind. They had a plan, a meeting, a date circled like a target. The pearl's clasp felt cold when I held it. The night before the meeting, the phone rang. I listened to the shaky voice on the line. Lucy's, I thought at first, but it was a woman from the law firm, polite and brisk. "We have not received the signed durable power of attorney," she said. "If Mrs. Price is unable to sign, we can proceed with an alternative authorized signature." Her words were careful, like someone moving a chess piece. I did not sleep at all that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the empty drawer open, and I listened for the click of keys, the sound of paper being slid into an envelope. I smelled coffee, a smell that used to mean someone had a kind thought for you. It tasted like worry. In the morning, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. There was a small envelope on the mat, and inside, a note in my daughter's handwriting. "We thought this would be easier for you, Mom. Sign and return. Love, Lucy." I looked at the blank power of attorney and the line for my signature and felt something inside me tighten like a corset. There is a moment when you realize the door to your old life is being closed for good. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my pocket. I would not give them the key. Then the phone rang again, and a voice I did not know said, "We are arriving to discuss the transfer of assets at noon." The clock on the wall read 11:58. They were 2 minutes away. I have learned, slowly and stubbornly, that dignity is a thing you either wear or you do not. It is not loud like a bell. It is quiet as the press of a hand on your back. And when someone tries to take that away, you get to choose whether you go soft like a chair or hold your spine like an iron rail. I stood at the window, the pearl still a weight in my pocket, and watched as a black car rolled up the street. I prayed, not for mercy but for memory. A small truth is a fierce thing. They came in at noon, like a procession, Lucy in a coat that smelled faintly of lilies, a man in a suit with a briefcase, and the woman from the law firm whose voice I could now place as the one who had called me in the night. David was there too, hair a little mussed from worry, and Clara, the lawyer with the soft eyes, had the look of a captain steering a boat through fog. They sat at the table, paper between them like a nervous barrier. The chandelier made the crystals sing little nicknames in the light. My kitchen, the place where I'd kneaded bread and mended shirts, felt like a courthouse. The man in the suit cleared his throat and laid a copy of the durable power of attorney on the table. It was a crisp thing, printed with the kinds of words that make you feel as if the world is pretending to be sensible. "Mrs. Price," he said, "we're here to ensure everything is handled properly. Your daughter has legal authority now to act on your behalf." He smiled like it was a kindness. I looked at the document. My name was there in black and white, Mary Evelyn Price, and a line for my signature that was filled with a looping script that could have been mine if I'd suddenly remembered how I wrote in my 20s. In the corner, a notary seal glinted. "No," I said. My voice came out small and precise. "I didn't sign this." Lucy's lipstick made a line as she smiled. "Mom, there's no need to be dramatic. I signed for you because," she shrugged like she'd dropped crumbs, "because you were tired, you were forgetting, and this is easier. We have your best interests at heart. Easier. Best interests." I have heard those words used to fold quilts and to fold people away. I felt a hot, astonished thing in my chest. Anger, yes, but a sharper thing, the sound of an old promise unpinned. My hands tightened on the edge of the table until the skin of my knuckles shone. Clara slid her glasses down the bridge of her nose and said, "We are requesting to see the original notarized document and the notary who performed such services. If there's any question about validity, we'll do a handwriting comparison and we'll subpoena any witnesses. Mrs. Price, did you sign this?" "No," I said, and it was the simple truth. The room felt suddenly larger, like my voice had opened doors that had been closed by a polite hand. David leaned forward. "Lucy, you told me you had Mom's best interests. What happened?" Lucy's jaw set. "We did what had to be done. Mom can't manage everything herself. This is for her protection. Protection or theft look very much alike when they come in from a polished lobby." I watched Lucy's hand, the way she smoothed the table linen, and I felt old enough to remember humiliation's shape. There was a sound from the hallway then, like a neighbor's laugh, and the world insisted on ordinary noise. Clara asked if I had been at the house on the date the document was signed. I told her I'd been right here, tending the geraniums, making coffee, the very things I had always done. She asked about witnesses. Where were the signatures that belonged to witnesses? The document they had presented had names, but my memory held no witnesses who had watched me sign. The more I spoke, the more the men with the briefcases shuffled paper as if the truth made them uncomfortable. Clara left us to request a copy of the original and to call the notary's office. "Don't worry," she said. But worry had a way of sitting in my lap like a cat that refuses to be shooed. She went out with David, and Lucy called someone and spoke in a low voice that made my skin gooseflesh at the way she said certain things. I knew my daughter's manners well. They were practiced. She could make a bitter bean sound sweet if she wanted to. After Clara and David left, Lucy stood and came over to the window. "Mom," she said, almost gentle, "this is easier. Just sign the confirmation page when someone brings it by. It saves everyone the trouble." I thought of my grandfather's advice. Paper is a faithful witness so long as it knows the truth, and how easily it could be persuaded to lie. The pearls in my pocket felt like a small, heavy grammar of the life I'd lived, and I pulled them out to touch the coolness of the clasp. They had the tiniest chip on one pearl where my husband must have dropped them years ago. That imperfection was my proof. Its absence would be a lie. I didn't sign anything. I wasn't going to be cajoled into handing over my voice on a napkin. Instead, I began to look for the gaps the way you look for mice in an old barn. Where did they slip through? Which door did they leave open? The first sign of deliberate mischief was a phone call Clara made an hour later. Her voice was low when she returned, and the color left her face a little. "Mrs. Price," she said, "I have requested the notarization journal from the notary listed on the document. If he performed the service, he must have entered it into his log. We also requested security footage from your neighbor's doorbell camera, in case there was any activity at your house the night the document was allegedly signed." My lungs tightened. "My pearls are missing," I blurted, and the room seemed to listen. Lucy's mask slipped, the barest crease of shock. Clara's hands were steady when she asked, "When did you last see them?" 10 days ago," I said. "They were in the velvet pouch in the drawer. The drawer is empty now." The notary's log was a small thing, but a single line could topple a building. It listed an entry, April 3rd, 9:15 a.m., notarization performed for Mary E. Price. But Clara discovered an anomaly, a stamp that didn't match the registry, a notary commission that had expired on March 15th. The log's ink was fresh, but the signature on the notary line didn't match the notary's registered signature on file. She said the words a lawyer says when she wants to be absolutely clear. "This looks like a forgery." I heard the syllables like stones dropped into a pond. There was more. The bank had a pending transfer that had been initiated on April 4th, $40,000 to an account in Lucy's name, and a notice that the retirement account would be reviewed on April 6th for possible transfer to a trust. In the ledger, it said, "Per Mrs. Price's instructions," in a handwriting that looked like a hurried clerk. $40,000 out of $230,000 is not theft in one night, but theft starts with thinking you can take a slice without waking the owner. I felt small fury bubble up like something I'd kept in the kettle for years. My hands wanted to tear the papers into confetti and throw them at their smug faces. Instead, I folded them and put them back into my pocket, because fire scares people more than truth sometimes. I told myself I would not set my hand to anything foolish. I would use the law the way a person uses the letterbox, to deliver what is needed. We began to gather evidence. Clara got a subpoena for the notary's log, and David drove to the bank to freeze transactions if possible. "We need proof of intent," Clara said. "Something that shows this wasn't an honest mistake." There came a small mercy, footage from the neighbor's doorbell camera. It was grainy, the kind of footage that looks like a watercolor painting where everyone is a smudge. Still, one frame caught a woman entering my house late at night. Her coat familiar, the way she walked with a certain calculated ease. The silhouette bore the outline of Lucy's profile. The timestamp at the bottom read April 2nd, 11:47 p.m. They showed it to me quietly, like you show an old photograph of a funeral to someone who has already lost someone. I couldn't breathe for a second. There she was, my daughter, crossing the porch with a small velvet pouch clutched at her side. I could see her hands. She had that small mole on the web of her thumb I used to point at when she was a child. The footage was not absolute proof of criminal intent, but it was a map. It showed movement. It showed the stolen pearls walking out of the house. I felt the sight of that dark silhouette like a slap, and then like a thief's hand. Anger replaced the slap. I could taste lemon bars in my mouth and that old, sour sense of being sold. I let myself remember the room I'd been locked in 10 years before. It was not dramatic at the time, just a locked door and an explanation that I must rest. I'd been alone, the phone in the hallway like an instrument of punishment. I pressed my cheek to the cool wood and felt my forehead heat against it. I think that was the first time I learned how small I could be made to feel. For a long time afterward, I told myself she had been young, she had been testing boundaries. But 10 years is a long stretch for testing, and locked doors do not tend to become keys by themselves. Dumas used to say softly that an offense is sometimes a seed of a lesson. I think I learned then that cruelty becomes familiar if allowed in. A woman's dignity is not a thing to be pawned off for convenience. That memory hardened my resolve. I would not be politely removed from my life. I would not be squeezed out like juice from an orange. Clara found more. Emails between Lucy and a lawyer in which Lucy bluntly asked, "How soon can we make this look like she agreed?" She's simple and easily confused. The words were colder than I expected. There was no daughter's slackness left in them, only a calculation. The lawyer's reply suggested a notarization and recommended a notary who, conveniently, could come to the house. The emails were time-stamped March 28th and March 30th, before the notary's alleged April 3rd entry. The paper trail began to braid. I read the emails aloud. She's simple and easily confused. The letters tasted of bile in my mouth. Lucy's face, when I looked at her, was completely composed. She smiled like a woman who had practiced saying, "I love you" for effect. Clara looked at me and said, "This is pretty damning. We can file for an injunction to stop any transfers and move to recover the pearls as evidence of theft." She folded the pages with the respect one gives to a fragile bird. "But Mrs. Price, you must be prepared for a battle. An injunction will escalate things. They may take countermeasures. The word felt small and terrible, like a child picking up rocks. I thought of the mason jar, tucked away under quilts, and the cheap note in my husband's handwriting, dated July 14, 1998. I thought of patching blue jeans and how long stitches hold. I had to make a stitch now to hold the rest of my life together. Legal battles are long stitches. We filed for the preliminary injunction late that afternoon. Clara typed with a speed that seemed to come from years of urgency. The courthouse lights flickered like lanterns. The clerk took the forms and asked questions about signatures and witnesses. "There will be a hearing," the clerk said. "But given the urgency, a temporary restraining order could be issued if the judge believes immediate action is necessary to prevent irreparable harm." The words irreparable harm sat on my tongue like a pebble. My heart clattered like a loose window pane. I realized I was allowed to be furious and smart at the same time. I could be small and sharp. It wasn't an either-or. There was a part of me that wanted to stand in the foyer and scream, "This is my life!" But Clara, practical and stern, told me to be quiet in the courtroom, to let the law do its loud work. We waited for the judge's decision like people waiting for weather to change. In the interim, David went to Lucy's house under the pretense of calming things and left with the velvet pouch tucked in his jacket after a brief, surreptitious negotiation with a housekeeper who still had a soft place in her heart for what was right. The housekeeper had found the pouch hidden in a pantry box labeled tins and had been worried. She had a conscience like a clock that still ran true. I held the velvet pouch when David came back. My pearls were there, warm with the body heat of a son who had known how to return things. I cried then, a wet sound that startled me by its strength. Holding them felt like being given a passport back to myself. I put them on slowly, one by one, the way you put on a coat in winter. The weight was familiar and holy. We thought that was it. We thought we had recovered the small, sacred things, and that papers could be contested in court while the treasures were back in my hands. But Lucy is not a woman who gives up on a plan with generosity. She had more strings to pull. The day the court considered the request for a temporary restraining order, Lucy arrived at the courthouse with 2 men I didn't know and a stack of papers taller than my grandmother's prayer book. The courthouse smelled like shoes and coffee and a city that thinks it knows the best path. I sat with Clara and watched as the opposing lawyer presented his case. His voice was slick as a well-buffed shoe. He said the word consent a lot. He said capacity and best interests and expedient management. He smiled with the satisfied look of a man who believes laws are puzzles to be solved for profit. Clara stood and spoke with a quiet, I had come to trust. She presented the emails, the notary registry discrepancy, the doorbell footage, and the bank ledger showing pending transfers. The judge, an older woman whose hair was a crown of silver, listened with both a microscope and a long view. The courthouse room was full of a hush that made the walls feel attentive. The judge asked me directly, looking over the top of her glasses. "Mrs. Price, did you sign this document?" Her voice was even, but it carried the weight of being believed. I said, with the modest courage I had gathered. "No, Your Honor, I did not." And then Clara presented something I did not expect. A letter my husband had written in 1998, what I had thought was private and lost, which David had found tucked into an old Bible. It was the small envelope with his handwriting. To Mary, in case we are ever tempted to let go, keep this. Inside was a note saying, plainly, how we wanted our affairs handled should anything happen. The letter was not a legal instrument, but it was a moral one. It reminded the court of who I had been and what I had built with my hands. I read it aloud, my voice steadying like a hand on a rail, and the words felt like a history being pointed back at the present. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued a temporary restraining order halting any transfers and granting us temporary control over certain accounts pending a full hearing. It felt like a small island in a storm. I let myself breathe into that small victory like someone who has been underwater for too long and finally surfaces. But Dumas taught me a thing or two about pride and consequence. Justice is often a patient beast, and those who pursue comfort over kindness will find themselves mangled in its slow teeth. To lose conscience is to be wealthy in coin and bankrupt in soul. I thought the victory would quiet Lucy. I thought she would fold like a poorly made napkin. Instead, she left the courthouse and, with a face like a mask, went straight to the local television station and spun a slow, aching story about elder confusion, a daughter's tough choices, and a mother who was perhaps not entirely able to manage alone. The news anchor said, "Compassion," as if it were a fixture on a mantle, and suddenly, public sentiment leaned the way the polished side of a coin gleams. There were calls, some bitter, some sympathetic. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years called to ask questions that felt like probes. "Are you safe?" they asked. "Are you being taken advantage of?" I said in short bursts, "I'm fine. I am here." My phone buzzed with the chew of society's appetite for a story. People like a neat arc more than messy truth. Clara advised we keep low, to let the law move quietly. But Lucy's camp was not content with social etiquette. They played for the public stage. I found myself in the middle of a war of definitions. Elder abuse versus protective care. The news segment had put a phrase in the air, "Mom's declining capacity," and suddenly that air pressed down like humidity. Then the unexpected thing happened. A hand-delivered envelope arrived on my kitchen table that evening. It was not from Lucy, nor from her lawyers, but from a man I'd never met, a notary public by the name of Samuel Brighton. Inside, neatly folded, was a notarization certificate and an affidavit. The affidavit read that Mr. Brighton had notarized the power of attorney on April 3rd at 9:15 a.m. at my house. He swore he was present. His seal was on the paper. Clara's face went very still when she saw it. "This is complicated," she said, but in her tone was the sound of a person who had just hit a snag in a well-ordered cloak. We ran the notary's commission number and discovered that Samuel Brighton had no active commission on April 3rd. His commission expired March 15th, as we'd seen earlier. Moreover, a neighbor 2 doors down came forward with a video. It showed a car leaving my driveway on April 3rd at 9:05 a.m., the very time Mr. Brighton claimed to be at my house. The car was not mine. Who was Mr. Brighton? And who was in that car? I had been feeling brave. Now I felt like a small animal who had discovered a trap. The papers in my lap were heavy with meaning and with danger. The court date for the full hearing was set for April 10th. The gala was scheduled for April 5th. The house was still listed for sale. Effective April 5th. The clock on my oven read 7:23 p.m., and the world was full of people making plans to move chairs. Someone had been very thorough. Someone had thought of nearly everything. I looked down at my hands, the ones that had baked bread and sewn on buttons and counted pennies from a mason jar. They were not the hands of a helpless woman. They had fingerprints. They had a Bible and a husband's note and a son who could return pearls. But Lucy had a schedule and a lawyer, and the kind of careful cruelty that comes wrapped in the language of care. Clara put a hand on my shoulder. "We're not done," she said. "We'll subpoena the notary's phone records, his vehicle logs, and file for a handwriting expert. And we'll prepare for the media spin. But we need one more thing, a witness who can directly tie Lucy to the removal of the pearls or the forged signatures." I thought of the housekeeper who'd found the velvet pouch. "She'll testify," I said. "She told David where she found them. She's honest." The housekeeper was ready. Her eyes were small and honest like coin silver. We made a list: notary logs, neighbor camera footage, bank holds, the housekeeper's testimony, that damaging email where Lucy called me simple and easily confused, and my husband's note. It looked like a quilt stitched from many small squares, some bright, some stained, but together they made a piece that might cover this breach. Lucy, however, was not yet cornered. That evening she texted me a short, cold message. "You shouldn't have involved the press, Mom. There are people who don't like to be humiliated." I read the message 3 times. The last sentence felt less like a threat and more like an announcement. Her gloves had come off. I folded the phone and tried to sleep. But sleep has not been easy since my drawer was emptied, my head filled with legal phrases and the image of that car driving away on April 3rd. I thought of the mason jar and how we'd saved for a roof, for a holiday, for a life that promised bread. I thought of every small kindness I'd given that had returned as caution. The night before the gala, as if someone wanted to make a spectacle of cruelty, a paper appeared on my doorstep. It was a printed invitation to Lucy's gala on April 5th, with my name removed from the guest list. It was a small thing, a cruelty folded into an envelope. But small cruelties have a gravity. They pull like a moon on the tides. At 6:45 a.m. on April 3rd, Clara phoned and said, "Mary, we have to move fast. The notary's records are inconsistent. We've asked for immediate preservation orders and a subpoena. The bank's transfers are on hold for now, but we need you to be prepared to testify. And David has something else. He's found a receipt." "A receipt?" I said. "For a storage unit rented under Lucy's name, dated April 4th. Could be where the pearls were stored temporarily." The sound of her voice was steady, but excited in that way professionals get when they think they've found a seam in a cloth. "We'll go get it." There is a point in every fight where you decide to be brave because you are tired of being frightened. I felt that way, honestly and firmly, as the morning sun found the streaks on my window. The law could be slow and the world unkind, but I had an army of small truths forming into a voice. My husband's note, my son's loyalty, the housekeeper's conscience, Clara's competence, the neighbor's camera footage. These were small soldiers. I put on my pearls and a cardigan and a face that said, as plainly as possible, I am not a woman who can be pushed off her porch and called quaint. I was going to the storage facility with David and Clara. We had only a sliver of time before the transfers could even be attempted. As we drove, my hands found the pearls and felt their ordinary weight. There is a sanctity in familiar things. They tell you who you are when words fail. I thought of my grandmother's hands and how she had taught me to knit through pauses until the pattern felt like prayer. When we pulled up to the storage facility on the edge of town, a man at the booth looked at our subpoena and sighed like someone whose day had finally acquired meaning. He went to the back with keys, and for a minute, as the door rolled up, I saw the inside of a dark box and thought of the drawer in my kitchen, the place where the letters had lived. Doors are doors. Some are locked. Some are rolled up. Some are opened by lawyers. The unit number was chalked on a clipboard. The lock was new. Clara slid the bolt and pulled the lock. The door rolled up with the sound of a shutter, and my breath left me like a forgotten summer. Inside, tucked in a cardboard box with packing peanuts, was a velvet pouch. My fingers closed on that familiar fabric, and the pearls inside sang with small clinks. There, folded atop the pearls, was a note in Lucy's handwriting, for safekeeping until things settle. I held the note as if it were a blade, and then as if it were a hand. Someone had planned this so cleanly. Someone had thought of a storage unit, a notary, a car, and a script. And yet, someone had been careless enough to leave a note in their own hand. We took photographs, logged everything, and I felt the rush of vindication. The pearls were back, and with them a small real piece of my life. We had more than suspicion. We had objects and dates and a negligent note. But as we drove away, the phone in Clara's hand buzzed with a call. She answered. Her face went pale. I could read the news in the lines of her mouth. What? She said. Are you sure? She covered the mouthpiece, and for a second I thought she would speak, and then she did not. She looked at us and said, We need to go to the courthouse right now. What happened? David asked. Clara's hand shook a little when she spoke. The papers. They've filed for an emergency guardianship with the county. Lucy says you are incapacitated, and you are to be taken for evaluation immediately. They have petitioned for temporary guardianship, and the sheriff has the order. The steering wheel felt uncomfortably real beneath my knuckles. We had thought the pearls would be the end of it, a small rescue. Instead, someone had prepared another move. The opponent had moved their queen. I felt a wash of something like ice, and then something harder, resolve. I thought of my locked room 10 years ago, and the way that felt like an open wound. My voice was quiet when I said, Then we go to battle. Clara's eyes met mine, steady and fierce. We will not let them remove you from your home without a full hearing, she said. A guardianship petition requires proof, and we will contest it. We'll call witnesses. We'll show the judge you are capable of making decisions. The sheriff was on his way, the paperwork was en route, and the court's calendar had a new entry for that afternoon. The world had narrowed down to a single, sharp path, old against new, memory against ledger, a mother against the daughter she had raised. I took a breath and felt my chest fill with the old, stubborn air of a woman who knew how to keep stitches holding. I had a lawyer, a son, a set of pearls, and a small, hideous dossier of evidence against a plot that had been planned with frightful care. The next moments would decide more than a bank account. They would decide whether a daughter could place herself between a mother and her autonomy under the guise of care. Clara started the car. Hold on, she said. This is going to be loud. I put my hand on the pearls in my lap, closed my fingers, and felt the small, indignant clinks of each one. The sheriff's cruiser rounded the corner as we turned toward the courthouse. Lights off, the quiet kind that holds something inevitable. And suddenly, the radio in Clara's bag crackled with a new voice. It was the judge's clerk calling. "Judge Monroe has just arrived in chambers. We have an emergency motion from Lucy's counsel," and the world seemed to tilt. The next steps would not be a quiet court session. They would be a confrontation where papers were read and futures decided. I swallowed, feeling a mixture of fear and a surprising, steady courage. And then the call cut out. There was only the sound of the car tires on the asphalt and the distant hum of the city, like a chorus waiting to see how the song ends. I held the pearls like a promise and thought of the mason jar under quilts. The handwritten note of my husband, dated July 14th, 1998, and the small, unglamorous life I had built. I had been pushed before. I had been told to be quiet. Now, with documents and footage and a housekeeper who still remembered how to be honest, I felt ready to fight. We pulled up at the courthouse and the doors looked, for once, like gates you could step through with your head held. The sheriff's cruiser idled at the curb. The papers were stacked. The gowns of lawyers rustled like dry leaves. And then, as we rose from the car, a man in a suit I did not know, taller than Lucy, stepped out and walked directly toward me. He held something in his hand, a glossy photograph. And on the back of it, in my daughter's handwriting, were 3 simple words. I opened my mouth, because some things demand a voice. But before I could speak, the man placed the photograph on the courthouse steps where all could see, and the picture fluttered down, showing a face I once loved and a moment frozen in time. I stared, and then everything changed in an instant. They put the photograph right there on the courthouse steps so that everyone could see it. Glossy, the kind of paper that makes small betrayals look like monuments. In the photo, I sat at a kitchen table, head bowed, a pill bottle tipped on its side and spilling a few white pills onto a doily. I was wearing the cardigan I'd worn the day I'd been locked in that back room 10 years earlier. Only in the picture, my face looked smaller and softer, like bread left too long in the oven. Lucy's name was scrawled on the back, 3 words, "She needs help." My breath hitched, and I saw, plainly, how easily a single image could turn into a verdict. The man in the suit who'd placed the picture folded his hands and said, "Your Honor, we believe this photograph, combined with testimony, supports our petition for emergency guardianship based on suspected incapacity. Mrs. Price cannot be allowed to manage her affairs." For a moment, the courthouse spun like a painted top. The sheriff's cruiser idled outside. The clerk's papers made a soft wind. I felt the pearls in my cardigan pocket press like a small, calm heartbeat. I had been frightened before, locked in, whispered about. But this fear had a shape I could look down at. I could see the knots. Clara stood up and spoke in that voice of hers that has, in the past, convinced judges to see what is hidden in plain sight. "Your Honor," she said, "this photograph is a single frame that shows nothing of Mrs. Price's overall capacity or lack thereof. It is at best ambiguous. We have a mountain of evidence that points to a coordinated effort to remove Mrs. Price's autonomy and assets. We request that the court deny the emergency guardianship petition and hold a full hearing." Lucy's lawyer was smooth. He nodded and said the photograph depicted a concerning episode. He asked the judge to grant immediate temporary guardianship pending a full capacity evaluation, a move that, if granted, could mean they could take me to an assessment facility, limit my contact with the outside, and freeze more accounts. The music the courthouse makes at such moments is the creak of statutes and the tap of gavel-ready phrases. Judge Monroe, whose hair was the color of river stones and who had the kind of voice that makes people tell the truth by mistake, looked at us all. She asked a question that landed like a coin on a table. "Mrs. Price, would you like to say anything?" My throat felt thick with the sound of my own life. I thought of the mason jar under quilts, the note my husband had written on July 14th, 1998, and the dough I'd needed for 10,000 biscuits. I thought of being left in a locked room and of pearls tucked into a velvet pouch. I looked at Lucy, not at her lawyer, not at her man in the suit, but at her, and I said plainly, "No, Your Honor, I do not have a problem remembering my life. I remembered to pay the electric bill last month." It came out with the small courage of ordinary things. There are moments when the law needs more than a heartbeat. Clara produced the storage unit receipt, the notary's affidavit with the questionable seal, The doorbell camera footage showing Lucy on April 2nd, 11:47 p.m. The email where Lucy described me as simple and easily confused. And the bank ledger showing the $40,000 transfer on April 4, 2025. She put them on the table like a careful woman laying out quilts, one by one, each square precise. Then she asked for the sheriff to have a representative retrieve the original photograph and any metadata it might contain. The photograph on the courthouse steps was glossy and loud, but the digital file might reveal the truth. It often does. A clerk fiddled with a phone and came back with a note. The image had been cropped and resaved, metadata stripped, an old trick like covering the name tag on a coat. When Clara pointed that out, the courthouse hushed with the sort of silence that is curious and uneasy at once. The notary's commission number was checked, and it confirmed what we already suspected. Mr. Brighton's commission had expired on March 15, 2025. When Clara requested his phone records, his attorney produced a line of calls that included a short call to Lucy's lawyer on March 30th and a series of unusual calls on April 3rd that did not match his known patterns. The notary, it seemed, had been hurried and careless. Judge Monroe listened, and her face was a study in careful balance. In between, she asked a question of Lucy that has the power to unmask people who practice kindness as if it were costume. Ms. Price, did you remove your mother's personal items from her home on or about April 2nd? Lucy's jaw went tight like a drawer that won't shut. She began. A woman's voice interrupted from the back of the room. It was Maria, the housekeeper, who had the soft, small hands of someone who still irons shirts and knows the smell of lemon oil. She had come that morning when Clara asked for witnesses. She stood with a courage that did not try to be pretty and said, "I found the pearls in a box marked tins in the pantry on April 3rd when I was cleaning. I saw Miss Price's daughter, Ms. Lucy, put the velvet pouch into a small cardboard box." The room held its breath. Maria's testimony was simple and true, the kind of truth that does not need dressing. The notary's log, when compared to his commission, showed an irregularity. The handwriting expert Clara had called in, a soft-spoken retired calligrapher named Henry, looked at both the signature on the power of attorney and my own historic signatures from checks and letters. He frowned and said, "This is not Mary Price's hand. The slant is off, the pressure is inconsistent. The capital M here is executed in a way Mrs. Price has not used since the 1970s. That last sentence sounded like a small miracle to me. Dumas wrote that the rope of righteousness sometimes hangs on a single thread, but if you tug at it long enough, the weave loosens. It seems the law, too, is sometimes a slow art, but it listens. There is a dignity and patience that outlasts the quickness of greed." When the judge considered all that was placed before her, the questionable notary, the storage unit, the doorbell footage, the bank ledger, the emails calling me simple, she made a decision that felt like someone opening a window in a stuffy room. She denied the emergency guardianship petition. She ordered that no personal removal or forced evaluation of me should occur without my consent or a separate, full evidentiary hearing. She issued a preliminary injunction preventing any transfers from the retirement account pending further proceedings. She also ordered that Lucy and her counsel produce all communications and receipts regarding the removal of Mrs. Price's items and that the notary be investigated for possible forgery and unauthorized notarization. That was the first exhale in a long while. The sheriff's cruiser eased away like a relieved animal. The pearls in my cardigan felt like a small altar of return. But the judge did not stop there. She looked over the rim of her glasses and added, "And Ms. Price, I suggest you consider appointing an independent, court-approved fiduciary to oversee your finances temporarily while we determine the truth." It sounded to David and me like caution, not punishment. It sounded like an invitation to keep my house and my life intact. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered like birds. Lucy's face had that strange, brittle calm that comes when people realize the stage is losing its audience. She left without the glossy photograph, which the judge ordered to be submitted as evidence with a request for its origin. Lucy's lawyer went one way, and Lucy went another. I watched her for a long moment, a mother who had chosen expedience as a habit. In the days that followed, the town felt like a net, catching gossip and casting it back in different shapes. Some neighbors stepped forward, others stepped back. Lucy's board at the charity, people who once nodded and drank wine together, began to worry in a way that looks like distance. There is a kind of social currency that depends on one's reputation being smooth. A scandal, even a petty one, becomes a tarnish. The bank reversed the $40,000 transfer pending the court's final decision. The account held by Lucy's name was frozen. The storage facility clerk testified that the velvet pouch had been checked in and out under a receipt that matched Lucy's driver's license and a card that was later traced to a mailbox rented in her name. The notary's phone records showed calls to Lucy's lawyer on March 30th and April 3rd. He told investigators that he had been contacted by a representative about coming to the house, but that he had not notarized anything. His seal, he said, had been stolen and used on the document. The sheriff's investigation widened, and the county prosecutor indicated she would review the case for possible charges of forgery and financial exploitation. A few nights after the hearings, I sat at my kitchen table with a lemon bar and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm from thought. The pearls rested in a soft velvet case beside me. I thought of my husband's little note and how he had always believed in leaving things plainly when the world got complicated. I thought of the mason jar tucked under quilts and the way small things hold against the tide. There is a grace in not being crushed by indignity. It is a quiet sort of justice, one that grows in the spaces between outrage and sleep. The righteous may be slow to arrive, but when they do, they bring evidence. The court asked for a full hearing and scheduled it for April 24, 2025. It would be a day of witnesses and papers, and perhaps cross-examinations that would make your spine feel raw. Clara told me to rest, to eat well, to bring comfortable shoes. It will be a marathon, she said. You must not be exhausted. There was a kindness in her practicality that felt like a blanket. On the morning of April 24th, the courthouse was bright as a church. I put on the cardigan my husband had once liked, and the pearls, and I sat with David and Clara while the world around us prepared for legal battle. The judge called the hearing to order, and the gallery hushed. A parade of witnesses came forward. Maria, the housekeeper, who told the simple truth about finding the velvet pouch. Mr. Benson, the neighbor, who testified about the doorbell camera and the car that left on April 3rd at 9:05 a.m. Henry, the handwriting expert, who walked the room through the differences between my signature and the one on the power of attorney. He made the air itself seem to write the truth. Lucy's lawyer tried the old strategies. Question the integrity of witnesses, cast doubt on timelines, suggest confusion where there is none. But subpoenas had gone out, and logs had been checked, and an independent forensic analyst, brought in by Clara, analyzed the document and found the notary seal to be copied. The ink inconsistent with that used by the notary on other days. The receipt for the storage unit showed the box was checked out on April 4th and returned on April 6th under a different name. The bank's records showed a pending edit to the retirement account on April 6th that would have transferred the remaining balance to a trust controlled by Lucy. Intent, the judge noted in an aside that sounded both weary and sharp, could be inferred from pattern and planning. At some point, the gallery began to murmur. Lucy excused herself, and when she returned, her eyes were wet. That is the thing about shame. It is not always loud. Sometimes it is very quiet. The judge took a long moment and then ruled. The durable power of attorney dated April 3rd, 2025, was void for lack of valid notarization and for probable forgery. The preliminary injunction against transfers remained, and an order was entered that Lucy must reimburse within 60 days the $40,000 taken from the account, plus interest and legal fees. The judge also referred the matter to the county prosecutor for review of potential criminal charges, including forgery and financial exploitation of an elder. She admonished Lucy and Ms. Price's counsel sharply for their conduct and ordered restorative mediation if both parties wished to pursue reconciliation. The word forgery tasted like metal in the mouth. I felt the slow relief of the law's blade cutting away a stranger's hold on my life. I also felt a deeper, older ache, one that has nothing to do with money. It is the loss of what we expect from our children. an instinct to hold, not to hollow out. The aftermath came in small domestic ways. Lucy tried to make apologies that sounded like transactions, flowers, a check, but the orchard of our lives is not sold for bouquets. Some neighbors would not meet her eye. The charity gala went on with fewer guests, and a small, awkward silence at one point when Lucy's name was announced and a few seats sat conspicuously empty. A woman I once subsisted alongside at church whispered to me that sometimes people forget which prayers are for gratitude and which are instructions for conscience. I did what many women of my generation do when life becomes suddenly complicated. I made soup. I gave David a recipe my mother had given me, and we laughed in a small way about how the simplest things still stitched a day back together. I had the bank put my pearls in a safety deposit box, and Clara helped me set up a trust named the Mary E. Price Revocable Trust, with my son David as the co-trustee after my express consent, and an independent fiduciary approved by the court to oversee matters until the estate issues were fully resolved. I paid Clara's invoices with a small, proud hand and set new locks on the front door. I kept the mason jar on the mantel, but moved it beside a small sign that read, in my handwriting, "For what matters." The court recommended a restorative mediation between Lucy and me. I went because I wanted something adult to occur in place of the parade of accusations. We sat across from one another with a mediator who smelled faintly of lavender and patience. Lucy's apology arrived like a wardrobe she had picked out to fit an occasion, precise, rehearsed. She spoke of fear and of not wanting to see me fail. She said she had been worried about my declining abilities and that she thought she was protecting me. Her voice cracked when she said she'd been selfish. She looked like a child who'd been caught stealing cookies and was trying to explain hunger. I listened. I felt anger and also the small, stubborn love that had put a child into the world in a small house with quilts and pennies. I asked her quietly, when did love begin to look like taking? She did not answer easily. I told her I forgave her, and I meant it. But I also told her that forgiveness without change is like a bridge built without footings. It looks lovely and will not hold weight. The town watched as Lucy's world tightened at the edges. Her name was removed from a charity board when members decided they did not want the association of scandal. That loss mattered to her more than I expected, not because of the position itself, but because it proved that social currency, once spent recklessly, is hard to retrieve. She paid back the $40,000 with interest, and the bank unfroze the remaining account, but under the court's watchful eye. The county prosecutor opened an inquiry into the forgery and financial exploitation. I do not relish the idea of criminality on my child's part, but justice is a rope that must sometimes be pulled tight. In the months that followed, I learned small, human things about healing. I refurbished the garden. I took Eleanor to the county fair and ate too much fried dough. We planted tomatoes and watched them ripen the old-fashioned way. I taped the little note from my husband inside the trust document, the same hand that had told me to keep certain things plain. I paid for a locksmith, and for a new set of curtains, and for a small trip to the seashore with David and Clara, a small victory for my stitches. People asked me sometimes if I felt bitter. I said truthfully, for a while, yes. But bitterness is a heavy coat. I learned to take it off and to walk in the sun. The pearls stayed in the bank box for a while. When I took them out, I wore them on the anniversary of our wedding and thought of my husband's hands folded into mine. Those small rituals matter. They stitch back dignity's frayed hem. Some days Lucy came by with a hand that trembled, part apology, part attempt to reconstruct what had been broken. We had conversations that were honest and painful and wooden at times, like old chairs learning how to hold one another again. In the end, the law had done its work. It kept my house, my money safe for the time being, and sent a clear message that one cannot carve a mother into a story she did not sign. Justice, in my experience, is often not theatrical. It is the small correction of a ledger, a reversal of a transaction, an order that forces a perpetrator to answer for what was done. It is the return of a velvet pouch, the apology that is not an eraser but a step. Poetic justice arrived in the form of a public resignation and a quiet restitution. Lucy's reputation frayed among people who preferred their names clean. Doors closed that had once opened easily. She had to rebuild in ways that money alone cannot build. If I am honest, I still mourn the person who made the choice to remove me from my life. But I have put my hand to the plow of living, and I keep moving forward. I plant tomatoes and hold lemon bars for neighbors and tell stories to anyone who will listen, the kind that have a beginning, a middle, and a lesson baked in. I learned to ask for help and to accept it. I learned to set boundaries and to put locks on doors when people confuse love with ownership. And there is a practical strand to the lesson. I signed my own durable power of attorney with the careful counsel of Clara and with my own preferred agents, named a document dated June 1st, 2025, so that I would never be left at the mercy of someone too eager for quick gain. I placed my pearls in a safe deposit box, and I set the mason jar on a different shelf with the velvet pouch tucked inside the trust folder. I made my legal choices loud enough that no one could claim ignorance. To the women listening, especially those who remember what it is to quilt, to mend, to count pennies from a mason jar, know this: dignity is a quiet thing, but a stubborn one. You keep it by being careful and by asking for evidence when someone offers kindness that smells like control. Protect your papers, keep your keys, and name someone you trust who will honor you, not use you. If my story touched you, share it with someone who needs courage today. And don't forget to subscribe. This old heart has many more truths yet to tell.